Hello and welcome to Meet the Composer, the interview show on banddirector.com that features in-depth discussions with writers of new music. I'm your host, Bill Withem. Thank you for joining me. On today's show, I'll be speaking with Matthew Schoendorff, and I'm just going to go ahead and give him a call, and we're going to get started right here in just a second. Matt.
Bill, good to see you.
Hey, how you doing?
All right.
Good.
All right.
Listen, let's start off with just a couple of background for
Sure.
our watchers and listeners on banddirector.com. Let's talk a little bit about. Well, first of all, I should explain that to our viewers that Matt graduated in 2009. Is that right?
Yes.
With
2009.
a doctorate in music composition from Michigan State University.
Correct.
And sometimes we value experience over academic credentials, but I want to just at least put that background out there so that we know Matt has the solid credentials. And then we can talk about some of the things that Matt's done and some of the things that he is currently involved in
Sure.
throughout
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
What would you like to know?
Well, we're going to talk about a little bit of everything, but one step at a time.
Fantastic. I'm an open book. Page one.
You think you kind of work equally in the young band or professional band, or you just sort of write for it and you don't
Well,
really think?
I guess the best way to describe it is I'm very much an opportunist. I will write
Okay.
for whoever's going to play the music. The whole I grew up playing in bands. I'm originally a euphonium player, which means that these days I now play bass trombone and tuba more than anything if I'm playing anything, because
Uh-huh.
let's be honest, a euphonium player, I mean, where do you play euphonium? Well, wind band, that's about it. But I fell in love with the ensemble, and I grew up with the ensemble. I really like it. It's a part of my musical upbringing, my musical experience. So wind band is something that I felt very comfortable with when I started composing. The whole young band thing came about when my older brother became a middle school band director down in Manchester, Michigan, which is just southwest of Ann Arbor, here in Michigan. And for about 10 years, he was working with the middle school program there. And he decided that he wanted to do something kind of special for his 7th grade band, because the 8th graders, they were the top group. They were going to move on to high school, rah-rah, whatever, 8th grade.
Right.
7th graders kind of got shortchanged every year. So we came up with this idea that every year I would write a brand new piece specifically for his 7th grade band for their spring concert. And it just kind of became a tradition. And it wasn't anything that I necessarily got paid for or anything. It was just, hey, write a piece and next dinner is on me. Yeah, that kind of thing. So it really honed my chops in writing for young ensembles and trying to write music that didn't sound like young band music, because
Well, what does that mean? Let's tell our.
well, I'll tell you exactly what that means. If you look at the repertoire for young band music, we're talking about anything up to grade 1, 2, 3 on the 1 to 6 grade level scale, maybe up through grade 4. A lot of that music is not written by actual professional composers. A lot of it is written by music educators who really have a lack of repertoire, and they need some repertoire that will do something that will do something pedagogical for students, which is great.
That's kind of
But
isn't that kind of like when you grow up playing flute and you need some pieces to play for like a solo contest, that sometimes a flute player will have composed some of the music that you play and
exactly.
geared it towards a younger level of performance ability.
Exactly. It's geared more towards achieving specific educational outcomes rather than whether or not this is an actual good, solid piece of music that someone would want to sit down and listen to.
Uh-huh.
Which, I mean, on the one hand, yes, that's great. The whole pedagogical part of that's fantastic. The problem, however, is that there is an audience, or there are audiences of people at these band concerts, most of them parents, and they have to listen to some of this stuff, and they might not understand the pedagogical implications of it, and it's just it falls flat a little bit because music educators, God love them, they're really good at what they do, but they're not composers. So I decided, hey, I did the education thing. I actually have a degree in music education as well as composition, and I was actually a middle school band director myself for a little while. So I was in the trenches. I know kind of how that works. But I also have the composition degrees. I have the compositional experience, and I thought there's got to be a way to write decent, manageable, I hesitate to say easy, but manageable music for these lower grade levels that still sounds like actual good music that someone in the audience would want to listen to. And so this 10-year project that I worked with my brother Ed down in Manchester with a 7th grade band every year, it gave me a chance to really hone my writing skills for a young band and still make it sound like real pieces of music. And, you know, some were more successful than others, but I think overall there were a good handful of those that came out of that 10-year project that really are successful, and they've gone on to be published, and last I know, they've been played in as far away as Australia and Japan, and, you know, that's fantastic. I can ask for more there. So, young band-wise, that was really, it was a learning experience for me, and I'm really glad I did that. Well, that answers part of your question.
That's fine.
Question,
yeah. No, that more than answers the question. Yeah.
Okay,
well,
fantastic.
I want to give the listeners a little bit of a background about you.
Sure.
From you, what would you say? Because a lot of times people want to know. They want you to pin it down to who's your favorite composer. Sometimes they ask you almost silly questions like that. But I think, you know, it is valid to know what our influences are. And I was curious if you want to talk about just maybe one or two influences. Obviously, as composers, we listen to a lot of music. And you and I both know that we have many influences. But I was curious if you could just maybe name a couple, whether they're actually other band composers or composers who have written mostly for Winds, or are they other composers from other kind of fields? And if you could talk a little bit about that, and
Okay, sure. I guess form and structure-wise, you can't do better than the big three: Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. Just in terms of the pacing of a piece of music. Granted, they inherited a great tradition of tonality and form by way of Haydn and coming out of the Baroque, which really helped their styles, especially for Mozart and for Beethoven. The whole sonata form thing, I don't want to get into a music history lesson because I'm going to save that for my class for the fall. So that's enough of that. But I do think that in understanding simply of form and function and pacing in a piece of music is really essential for any composer writing for any type of ensemble, especially a large ensemble like band. When it comes to the actual sound of the music that grabs me, I guess it would be a mixture of probably Stravinsky and Debussy on one end, and probably Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead, and Jamiroquai on the other end, and fill in the spaces in between. There is nothing that I won't listen to at least once, and I will take everything I can get from whatever I listen to. So my influences are extremely varied. There was a while where I was really, really big into Howard Hanson, but I want to, a little asterisk beside that, not Symphony No. 2, the only piece that everyone knows by him and everyone hates. Get to Symphony No. 3, where he finally figured out how to write a symphony. Symphonies 3 and 6 are some of the most phenomenal pieces of music I've ever heard.
Okay.
So those have been really big influences on me as well. As far as band composers, honestly, the band composers that I've been really into at any given time, say Gillingham or Mark Camphouse or any of the BCM guys right now, Eric Whitaker, Stephen Bryant, and friends.
Okay.
Their influences tend to be a little bit similar to my own influences, so I mean,
Yeah.
it
Okay.
kind of matches up that way.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Cool. Yeah. That answers that question definitely.
Cool. Cool.
What about when you actually sit down to write a piece? How do you approach that? Are you sort of like what we might think of like as old school, like pencil paper, or do you generate ideas purely out of imagination, or do you say, well, my last piece did this, so my next piece I need to do this? Do you sit down at a piano? Is it computer software?
Man, it's a different process every single time.
Yeah.
It really depends on the piece. Sometimes it will all start with it will start with a neat title. Sometimes it will start with I don't know, with two little chords or something that go together, and the relationship between the two. Sometimes it will start with I'll get an idea of a certain sound that I want fully orchestrated that's about maybe 5 seconds long, and then I have to extrapolate that into several minutes of music. There's really no one way that it works, but I've been at it long enough to know that there are enough ways that it does work that I have to keep my mind open and paying attention all the time just in case.
Okay.
And generally, before I even sit down and start putting notes into software, I'll try to have about 70 to 80% of the idea of the piece more or less in mind, and I'll have a few pieces of staff paper with notes written all over it. I will have absolute mounds of Post-it notes with little things stuck all over the place. It looks like, it looks like an office explosion, but I know where everything is and what's going on, and really that's all that's important for any given piece. So it really depends.
Okay.
There's no set method.
Yeah.
It's a little bit method, a little bit madness, somewhere in between.
It sometimes feels like you're in a room or a hallway full of doors, and you just knock at each door until one of them opens, and then whichever one opens, you go through that door. Or at least that's how it's felt to me recently with just composing.
If the door is locked, you move on.
Yeah.
Like Storm for droids.
Yeah. Now, what was the most recent piece you wrote? I believe was Distance Imagined.
Yes. Yeah. I finished that. Just about a year ago was the final version that I submitted to the Grand Rapids Funk Band, Grand Rapids, Michigan. They commissioned it in honor of their past director, Dr. John Stanley Ross, who is now the director of bands down at Appalachian State University in North Carolina, which I believe you are familiar with.
Yeah, that's my undergrad. That's my alma mater.
Yeah, small world, right? And he actually came up for the premiere back, was it February? Yeah, I believe it was in early February. And it turned out really well. I took some gambles with orchestration. I've been doing all kinds of orchestrational experiments, I guess, the past 4 or 5 years, just to see what I can do with the wind band and make it not necessarily sound exactly like the wind band sound.
Well, let's stop and talk about that for just a moment. What are some things that, especially like for band directors that might be listening, what are some things that you notice that are constants among most band music, and some things that you feel work and then don't work and then you avoid, perhaps, or if you're like me, you avoid some of those things to try to make your music sound more unique or more more better, I guess, or more to seek out more clarity in the scoring. What are some things you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues, and it goes back to the music for younger bands, where a lot of it is not necessarily written by actual composers, but by well-meaning music educators who do things for a pedagogical purpose, and it does teach the students something. But a lot of the doubling, there are a lot of the just a lot of the ways that they write certain things that work out pedagogically really well. They leave a lot to be desired musically. So you get a lot of doublings among. You could think of it as well, any piece of music is going to be anywhere between 4 to 6 different parts, and then you have certain standard doublings. Like the flutes and trumpets are always going to double. The clarinets are going to do their own kind of thing. They're the string section, you know.
Uh-huh.
The saxophones and the horns are going to double up with each other, which is a questionable choice because, you know, one group is in the key of E flat, the other's in the key of F, and there's tuning problems there, but that's completely a
It's
story.
kind of like oil and water.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. It's not a big deal for older performers who know how to adjust in performance. But if you're talking middle school students, they're still learning how to do that. It's a questionable choice at best.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got your bass line, which is basically anybody who plays anything close to the bass clef. They're more or less playing the same thing all the time. And then you got the percussion where you got to keep them busy all the time. Otherwise they're going to find other things to do that are, less productive, like throwing sticks and this and that. And
Yeah.
Any band director will have 1,000 stories of what percussion do and should not be doing. So there are a lot of extra musical issues when it comes to writing for particularly younger bands that have more or less decided a certain kind of orchestration and instrumentation that works, and it's functional rather than musical, which, I understand that makes sense, but when it comes to a purely musical standpoint, it gets kind of boring. So more and more, especially with the younger band pieces, and then I would try to come up with some alternative orchestration ideas, and I tried it out first with some of the younger band pieces, especially in the ones that I was writing for my brother back when we were doing that project. Because I knew if I could get it to work with younger bands, then I could take it a little bit further, and I could use it on a larger scale for grade 5, grade 6 pieces, for upper high school level, college level groups, even some professional, some of the military groups. So it was a matter of doubling things that aren't necessarily doubled, certain instruments that you don't normally hear doubled but do create an interesting sound. I guess you could make a comparison with what Ravel did in Bolero. He came up with completely new sounds simply by the way he would double and triple instruments. Mm-hmm. So working a little bit with kind of along those lines, maybe giving the melody to somebody who maybe not the flutes and trumpets for once. Giving a melodic line to the bass line for once,
right?
Something like that.
Almost a more contrapuntal texture.
Exactly, yeah. Just experimenting with things, trying to find other ways to make it work so that you don't get that usual band sound, if you know what I mean. It's the sound that you hear at every school band concert, and it works, but it gets old really quickly. So I'm looking for ways to change that up a little bit. Another thing that I've been bringing into that is some of the influence of a lot of the electronic music I listen to. I've been trying to find ways to orchestrate acoustically a lot of electronic effects, which is something that I did with the last piece I wrote while I was at Michigan State, the 3-movement piece, the standard model, where I really wanted things to sound like electronic effects, but it was all acoustic orchestration, all acoustic instrumentation. So a lot of experimentation led to a better idea of, well, this works, this doesn't work, but at least I know that these things work, and I can, I have a broader palette of orchestrational sounds now. So
yeah,
it's an ongoing process, and there's some things are gonna be more successful than others, but I think it's an important thing for somebody to be out there to be doing. So
yeah.
I'm gonna find myself to do it.
Right. Now I remember seeing a PowerPoint presentation by David Gillingham probably about 10 years ago, and he talked
Okay,
about
yeah.
what he called the Squeezebox sound of bands. And that was his name for
Yes.
it. And just
Yes.
because it kind of had that accordion sound of like squeezing and sort of contracting and expansion, and that was something that he tried to avoid consciously by choosing his doublings very carefully and
Yes.
allowing for
Yeah.
different sections to
Yeah.
play. So that was sort of something that was inspiring to me as well, to observe
Yeah.
that this thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on, that was unstimulating about writing for band. He sort of captured it and described it really well, and then said, "And here's what I do to get around it." So I've
Yeah.
always kind of used that as a template for how to orchestrate in very interesting ways. So yeah,
Right, and,
yeah,
and I think that I think it's getting better too, because more and more you're getting actual composers writing for the ensemble rather than just music educators.
uh huh,
You're getting your Stephen Bryants and your John Mackeys and your Jonathan Newmans, and you're getting actual composers who know what they're doing, who are taking the ensemble more seriously, and you're getting a broader spectrum of what this ensemble can do. It's not just, oh well, here's a wind band, but it's a collection of these instruments that happen to make up a wind band. What can you do with it? So
mm-hmm.
I think it's actually a really exciting time to be not only writing for wind band, but also to be performing in and conducting wind band. It's a really neat time right now.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. Well, I want to talk about not so much electronics technology, but more like
Sure.
the production technology. I think probably, and we don't have to dwell on this for a very long time, but
Sure.
I think on some level, some of the band directors have probably started to use Finale, Sibelius, and some of the other variations of those different
Yeah.
softwares. And I think some of them are probably curious what composers use and why. And I just thought if we could maybe just briefly discuss like what you use, like how you produce a score, sort of just a technical sort of play by play, just to address it. Again, we don't have to spend a great deal of time on
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but
Sure. Like I was saying before, about 70 to 8% of what the piece is going to be is done before I even set up the score in Finale. I'm a Finale user.
okay,
I just easily could have been a Sibelius user, but I started drinking Coke before Pepsi came out, basically.
okay,
If that much makes sense. Yeah. So I've stuck with Finale, and it's done everything I needed to do. But before I even set up the score, most of what I do comes out as scribbled notes on staff paper and post-it notes. These guys right here, these are my best friend in the entire world when I'm writing these post-it notes. And I'll keep I'll keep a file folder of all the ideas for one specific piece. This one is actually one that I'm trying to work on for the symphonic band over at Michigan State at the moment, which I wanted to have done a few months ago, but well, we know how that goes. Anyway, but yeah, I generally don't like to use technology too much until I'm ready to jump into it and know what I'm doing. And then really the only technology I use is Finale, and I'll use the playback just to double check, make sure I put in the right notes and that kind of thing.
okay,
So I guess in a sense, compared to what other people are doing these days, I'm a little bit old school, but I don't know. That's just how I've always worked. But
mm-hmm.
sometimes if I come up with an idea and it comes up fully orchestrated in my head and I got to get it down right away, sometimes it's easier just to go right into the notation program and do it up right there first and bypass all the scribbled notes and all that. So
right.
it depends on the situation, but usually Finale comes or any kind of actual software comes last.
Yeah, okay,
If
okay.
if I can, yeah.
Yeah,
But
technology.
I do know that. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say technology is sometimes late in the game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, it depends on how familiar you are with certain technology and where you're coming from with it. For instance, I know Stephen Bryant. I know that a lot of his writing he does actually in a MIDI sequencer, And then once he gets it right that way, then he will transfer it into a notation program, and that works for him. So I think it's very much an individual thing. You could ask 1,000 composers and get 1,000 different answers to that question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Now, I want to tell our listeners that recently Matt was asked to write. I don't want to say compose, because in this case it's prose, but he was asked to contribute a chapter or a whole portion of the book Composition for.
Sure.
Sorry, help me out with the title. Composition for Young Bands.
Several years ago, Mark Camphouse started a series called Composers on Composing for Band. And
Thank you.
He wanted it to be a 4-volume thing. A new volume that would come out every couple of years. And the first one started out with your big heavies. You had Mark Camphouse. You had David Gillingham. You had all the really big names for that first book, and each one wrote a chapter. And the chapters were all organized according to certain questions, like, well, how do you approach orchestration? How do you approach the commissioning process? And then everybody would write their own little blurb about how they approach all these different issues in composing for band. And it turned out to be a really useful resource, especially for younger composers, and especially for conductors, because they got some insight into the mind that created, or the minds that created the music that they were working on a day-to-day basis. And he decided that when the series would end with the 4th and final volume, he wanted it to he wanted that one to encompass young and emerging composers. And this was a few years ago. I want to say 2008, 2009. So I guess I'm still a young and emerging composer. Fingers crossed, until the hairline recedes a little bit more. We'll see. But yeah, he asked me to contribute a chapter to the 4th and final volume, and I actually got it. It's got a bunch of other probably recognizable names to anybody in the band world. You've got Travis Cross, who is he still at Northwestern? I can't remember. He conducts a lot. Cormac Cannon, who actually is he's on the faculty at Michigan State now. Who else do you have? Kyle Kindred, Michael Markowski, who's really big right now. Vincent Apito, who actually he's doing a little bit, quite a bit with film scores out in Hollywood, I believe. He's got pictures with him and John Williams, and I'm really jealous of him a little bit for that. And several others, and I happen to be one of the people among all these remarkable young and emerging composers, and I was really happy to be a part of that. I was honored to be asked to be a part of that. So that 4th and final volume of Composers on Composing for Band is out there, and it may be useful for conductors, or it may be a bunch of young composers. I don't know, being a bunch of blowhards. It depends on how you look at it. I don't know, but there it is. Yeah. I was honored to be a part of it. So. All right. Well,
Cool. I want to talk about specifically with your music. You kind of hinted at a little earlier how you listen to, one extreme is over here sort of very, very rooted in the kind of classical, I guess, Western Europe art form of classical art music.
Right, sure.
And then the other extreme is Nine Inch Nails and other electronic popular music forms. So we sort of hinted at it a little bit, but I've been asked this question before, and I found it profoundly irritating and annoying. But I realized when the question was, describe your music, and I thought, well, you just have to listen to the music. I don't want to sit here and sum it up for you. But in talking with some colleagues, I realized at a certain point, a lot of times people don't have the luxury when they're confronted with you, so you have to kind of figure out a way to talk about it. But I thought I wanted to ask you, what do you hope people get, whether it's audiences, young musicians, almost professional musicians, or band directors, conductors? what do you hope they get from the music, and what do you hope that they take away from it, so that if someone's like, I want to play your music, but I don't really know what's going to distinguish it, or why should I go listen to a piece of yours? What would you? I mean, what are some things about it that you find unique and that you hope others do?
Wow, yeah, that is a very difficult question to answer. I guess the best way to approach it is whenever I'm writing. I think it actually it ties in with another question I get, which is how much theory knowledge do you have to have in order to be a composer? And when it comes down to it, technically none, because theory you don't need to know anything in order to write down what you hear. But it's really useful to have that because it gives you a good set of tools so that you can quickly identify what you are hearing and then go from there. It's the difference between a carpenter building a bench and having the right tools and not having the right tools, basically. So beyond that, the way that I write my music until I like what I hear, and a lot of it has to do with timing and pacing. I'm very conscious of the way that my music develops, and how the swells work, how the large parts work, and how the more intimate sections work, and how they all go together, and so that it paces itself well, and things happen at exactly the right time. Because if there's one thing that separates music from almost any other art form, except perhaps film and theater, is that it does happen within a fourth dimension. Mm-hmm. It starts here, and then by the end, it's something different. You know, you can look at a painting, you can notice different things, but they were always there all at the same time. Music is not like that. So timing and pacing are very important in music, and they're very important to me in the music that I write. It has to be something that I personally want to hear. I think it's a waste of time to try and write music that will appeal to a certain audience, because at the end of the day, not even the audience knows what they want to hear until you tell them what they want to hear, and they agree, yes, I like that, or no, I don't. You can't write for other people because they don't even know what they want. So really the only thing that I can do is write until I like what I hear, until I'm happy with the piece, and if I'm happy with the piece, then fingers crossed, someone else might be too. And that's the best I can do at the end of the day. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best answer I got, I guess.
Yeah, okay. When well, I have a question that's maybe kind of connected to that, but it's a little more philosophical.
Oh, I look philosophical. Sure.
What does music need to do?
What does it need to do?
Yeah, what does music need to do?
It doesn't need to do anything.
Does it need to, have a definite beginning, middle, and end? Does it need to have some amount of contrast, or does it need to tell a story, or does it as you bring that into your own experience, do you ever think of it in terms of that, or do you you just simply kind of write each piece and it does what it does, and then that's the end of the story?
Well, it's probably more the latter for me specifically, simply because that's the kind of music I enjoy. I mean, I don't think you can make a broad statement that music needs to do anything. If it really needs to do something, then all of a sudden you're going to have an argument with John Cage, and he's dead, and that's going to be a difficult argument to make. So, so what it really comes down to is, well, what does music need to do for me personally? And for me personally, music is drama. It doesn't necessarily have to tell a story, but there has to be a dramatic element. There has to be some kind of material, some kind of theme, some kind of relationship between intervals or a rhythmic. So there's got to be some kind of little core or seed of the piece, which then I like to think organically grows in a more or less natural way to its natural conclusion by the end of the piece, and that's the drama of the piece. Yeah. But that's my music. I mean, again, you ask 1,000 composers, you're going to get 1,000 different answers. Yeah. But for me, that's the music that appeals to my aesthetic, That's the music that I want to hear. So hopefully my music does that. I really don't know how else to answer that question beyond that. So I hope
that's the perfect answer for it. Is that I mean,
cool.
you personalized it, but that's kind of what I was wanting you to talk about is what you know, what for you does your music need to do every time you sit down to create a new piece? What does it need to do? You know, what do you want to do with it, no matter what the topic of the piece or what the sort of format is of it? So
For me, it just has to fulfill the natural conclusion of the development of the materials that I set up at the beginning of the piece in a very organic and dramatic way. Wow, that sounded way better than I thought it would. Awesome. I should write it down. All right. Anyway.
And just kind of winding down a little bit. I wonder if you had any observations. You know, these days, because of technology, obviously, there's a lot of possibilities. We've seen things like Eric Whitaker's virtual choirs using YouTube. Of course, we see and have seen since John Adams has been writing his orchestral pieces the use of keyboards on stage to sort of have synthesizer sounds mixed in with the orchestra. I just wondered if you had any observations about any of these or your own experiences that you would like to talk about or add to, or anything that you are curious about, like things you'd like to try and you haven't seen yet.
Well, I think it's neat that that electronics are being introduced into the acoustic ensembles. I don't know, from a logistical standpoint, I don't know if that is something that makes the piece readily or readily performable by a lot of ensembles. Certainly, you know, your college ensembles would be able to do that. I think it's a really cool thing that people are doing. For myself, I haven't really jumped on that bandwagon quite yet, I guess. What I do like to do, though, is I'm a big fan of certain electronic sounds and electronic effects, and I try to find ways to mimic those just in the way that I orchestrate acoustically. That's kind of been my compositional train of thought for the past few years. Mm-hmm. And I think that right there creates its own unique blended sound, and I mean, whether or not that actually pans out as being an important development in the history of where wind band goes, I don't know. But that's kind of what I've been doing, and I don't know. You asked, say, Stephen Bryant. He's writing pieces for wind ensemble plus an electronic backing track, and you know that works in its own way, and it's really cool. But personally, I like to keep things logistically as manageable as possible, so that as many groups as possible can approach it and actually be able to do it. Which means making sure that everything is more or less acoustic. You know, I might throw a piano on stage, maybe a harp on stage with the wind band instrumentation. I'm a big fan of piano with large ensemble. That's just a personal thing that I enjoy. Mm-hmm. But I think if I can keep everything as the actual instruments as acoustic as possible, it makes it more manageable in a performance environment. But the way that you orchestrate that, you can do some really interesting electronic type effects just with the way that you interplay different rhythms and different timbres of the instruments. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with that at the moment. I don't know. Ask me next week, I might have a completely different answer. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
All right. And closing question is, you mentioned a little bit about the piece for Michigan State. I was just going to ask what's next for you, and maybe if you could say a word or two about that. Or unless you have another project that's coming up after that.
Well, at the moment, that's my main writing project. I would like to get that done before the end of the summer. We'll see how that goes. I want to get that piece completed and delivered over to Michigan State as soon as possible. Right now, I'm juggling a few different ideas. I need to decide on one and just go with it. But that's going to be it's going to be a band piece, probably grade 5, grade 6. It's going to be a little bit more advanced. It's probably going to be about a 5-minute concert opener or something like that, something really big and loud and ambitious, and that's where I would like to go with it. So that's my current writing project. Other projects right now, I'm preparing for the theory and private composition classes I got coming up for the fall semester at Wayne State. I've got a species counterpoint guideline handbook that I need to adapt and edit and get prepared for that. So a lot of the things I'm doing have nothing to do necessarily with composition specifically at the moment, but I do have that one main project that I'm working on. So
okay,
yeah,
all
we'll
right,
see how it goes.
All right. Well, good luck with that, and
Thank you, Ben.
we'll check back in whenever you've got that piece finished and getting ready for premiering. I'm sure we'll communicate with Dave Knox at banddirector.com and see if we can post some information for people who are interested and wanting to check out that premiere.
That'd be cool. That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome, Matt. I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks again for your time.
Well, absolutely.
And
anytime.
Awesome. We'll have a great weekend, and we'll hopefully be hearing some of your music soon.
Sounds good. Take care, Bill.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That will do it for this episode of Meet the Composer. If you have any suggestions for composers that you would like to see interviewed, please send them to D Knox. That's the letter D, KNOX at banddirector.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.